For more than a century, professional hunters in Africa, Alaska guides, and big game hunters around the world have quietly trusted one cartridge above all others, the .375 H&H Magnum. Designed before World War I, it remains one of the few cartridges trusted for everything from distant plains game to life-or-death encounters with dangerous animals at close range. Despite countless newer magnums, nothing has truly replaced it. The reason is simple. Early 1900s hunters needed a rifle that could handle both small, long-range game and massive, dangerous animals capable of charging after being wounded. Light rifles lacked stopping power, while heavy, dangerous game rifles were difficult to carry and shoot accurately. In 1912, Holland & Holland created the .375 H&H Magnum to bridge that gap, and in doing so, produced one of the most versatile and influential hunting cartridges ever made. The engineering behind the legend. The genius of the .375 H&H wasn't raw power. Plenty of cartridges before it hit harder on paper. The genius was a long, gently tapered case, with almost no shoulder angle at all, paired with a raised belt at the base to establish proper head spacing in a bolt-action rifle. That tapered design fed like butter through a magazine, even under the kind of panic and adrenaline that turns a smooth reload into a fumbled one when an animal is closing distance. Reliability under stress was never a footnote for this cartridge. It was the entire design brief. But the real trick, the one that actually made the one rifle for everything idea possible, was how forgiving the case turned out to be, with different bullet weights. Load it with a 235-grain bullet, and you had something flat-shooting and controllable enough for deer-sized game at real distance. Load the same case with a 300-grain bullet for buffalo or brown bear, and here's the part that made professional hunters take notice. It hit almost the same point of impact on target as the lighter load. Most cartridges shift their zero dramatically when you swap bullet weights that much. The .375 H&H barely blinked. That meant a hunter could carry a handful of different loads for a handful of different animals, all through the same rifle, without resighting between them, which is exactly the kind of quiet, unglamorous engineering detail that never makes a spec sheet, but decides whether a hunter makes a clean shot or a wounding one. Why professionals still trust it over almost everything newer? Here's what should really catch your attention. In the century since 1912, cartridge design has advanced enormously. Modern powders burn cleaner and more consistently. Modern bullet construction holds together through bone and hide far better than anything available when the Doc. 375 was designed. Newer, harder-hitting magnums have been engineered specifically to try to dethrone it. And yet, walk into a professional hunting camp in Zimbabwe, Tanzania, or Botswana today, and the .375 H&H is still overwhelmingly the cartridge guides recommend, and often the cartridge they carry themselves as backup when a client's rifle isn't enough. Some African countries even wrote the .375 into law directly, setting it as the practical minimum caliber legally required for hunting dangerous game, a regulatory nod to more than a century of field evidence about what actually stops an animal capable of killing the hunter first. It sits at the smallest end of what professional hunters call charge stoppers, the category of cartridges considered serious enough to reliably turn back a charging elephant, buffalo, lion, or leopard, and it earned that classification the same way everything else on this channel earns its reputation. Not through a marketing department, but through a century of guides staking their actual lives on it and it not letting them down. And it isn't just brute force doing the work. Bullets fired from the .375 H&H carry genuinely excellent sectional density, meaning they're built to punch deep and straight rather than dumping their energy on the surface. Animals hit well with it, consistently don't travel far, which matters enormously in thick brush, where a wounded, angry animal that runs another 100 yards into cover becomes a serious safety problem for everyone tracking it. The part most hunters get wrong: recoil. Ask almost any American hunter who's never fired a .375 H&H Magnum why they've avoided it, and recoil is almost always the first answer. The cartridge has developed a reputation as a shoulder-punishing powerhouse, the kind of rifle you shoot once or twice at the range just to say you did, then quietly put back in the safe, because practicing with it simply isn't enjoyable. For many hunters, that reputation alone is enough to rule it out before they've ever handled one. And to be fair, launching a 300-grain bullet at roughly 2,500 feet per second produces real recoil. There's no pretending otherwise. Compared to standard deer cartridges like the .243 Winchester or .308 Winchester, the .375 H&H is unquestionably a step up in both power and the amount of energy pushed back into the shooter's shoulder. What often gets lost, however, is the difference between substantial recoil and unmanageable recoil. The .375 H&H has spent decades being described in almost mythical terms, and those stories have created expectations that don't always match reality. Fired from a properly designed rifle that fits the shooter well, with a quality recoil pad and a sensible overall weight of around 9 pounds, the recoil is firm but remarkably smooth. Rather than producing the sharp, abrupt slap associated with some lighter Magnum rifles, many shooters describe the .375 H&H's recoil as more of a long, heavy push. It's certainly noticeable, but it's also predictable, making it easier to recover from than many people expect. A large part of the cartridge's intimidating reputation comes from how people first experience it. Many test-fire one from a shooting bench, leaning forward with their shoulder locked into the stock while sighting in the rifle. Bench shooting transfers nearly all of the rifle's recoil directly into the shooter, with very little opportunity for the body to move naturally. Almost every powerful hunting cartridge feels harsher under those conditions than it does in the field. Stand up, assume a proper hunting stance, mount the rifle correctly, and let your body absorb the recoil the way it was meant to, and the experience changes dramatically. That's how the rifle is actually used during a hunt, and it's also why so many hunters walk away surprised after firing a .375 H&H for the first time. In fact, many experienced shooters argue that several popular American Magnum cartridges produce recoil that's just as unpleasant, or even worse, because they're often chambered in lighter rifles and generate a sharper recoil impulse. The .375 H&H's combination of rifle weight, moderate velocity, and classic cartridge design tends to produce a recoil sensation that many hunters find more manageable than expected. It's demanding enough to command respect, but far from the uncontrollable beast its reputation suggests. Hunters who spend meaningful time with the cartridge often report that the fear disappears after just a few practice sessions. Like any powerful rifle, proper technique matters. A solid stock weld, consistent shoulder placement, and regular practice do far more to tame recoil than simply trying to brace for it. For those still concerned, manufacturers also offer reduced recoil or lighter practice loads that allow shooters to become comfortable with the rifle's weight, balance, and handling before moving on to full-power hunting ammunition. Those loads make it possible to build confidence and muscle memory without enduring the shoulder fatigue associated with heavy, dangerous game loads. Ultimately, the .375 H&H is a cartridge that deserves respect, but not fear. Its recoil is significant because its performance is significant, yet decades of stories have exaggerated it into something almost legendary. Hunters who actually shoot one under realistic field conditions consistently discover that it's far more comfortable, controllable, and shootable than its reputation would have them believe. For many, The biggest surprise isn't how hard it kicks. It's how much they were expecting it to kick before ever pulling the trigger. Not just an Africa gun. This is where many American hunters arguably sell the 375 H&H Magnum short. There's a persistent assumption that this cartridge exists purely for African safaris and has little practical value in a North American gun safe. But that idea falls apart once you look at what the cartridge is actually capable of. Yes, it is unquestionably more powerful than what's needed for white-tailed deer, antelope, or black bear. But that's hardly unique. Plenty of American hunters own rifles chambered in cartridges that deliver more power than necessary for everyday hunting, simply because they appreciate the added versatility or plan to pursue larger game in the future. The .375 H&H just happens to occupy a different end of that spectrum. Where it truly separates itself is at the top end of North America's game animals. For hunters pursuing coastal brown bears in Alaska, massive bull moose in thick timber, or even bison, the .375 H&H provides a level of confidence that smaller cartridges simply cannot match. These are animals capable of absorbing tremendous punishment, covering surprising distances after being hit, or even charging when wounded. In those situations, having a cartridge that delivers deep penetration, heavy bullet weight, and reliable performance from virtually any angle isn't simply a luxury. It's a meaningful advantage. The .375 H&H isn't merely adequate for these hunts. It has earned a reputation over more than a century as one of the most dependable cartridges ever designed for large and potentially dangerous game. It is comfortably enough gun for anything the continent can put in front of a hunter, with a healthy margin to spare. What's perhaps more surprising is how well it performs on animals much smaller than the game it was originally designed to hunt. Because the .375 H&H launches relatively heavy bullets at moderate velocities, compared with many modern Magnum cartridges, it often causes less dramatic meat damage than hunters expect. Instead of relying on extremely high speed, it achieves its effectiveness through bullet mass, penetration, and controlled expansion. Hunters who've carried the cartridge for years frequently report clean, efficient kills on elk, caribou, mule deer, and even whitetails when appropriate bullets are used and shots are carefully placed. Rather than violently tearing through an animal, it tends to punch straight through while transferring its energy in a controlled and predictable manner. That combination of power and restraint is what gives the 375 H&H its enduring reputation as one of the ultimate one rifle for everything cartridges. It offers enough authority for the largest and most dangerous animal you could reasonably hunt in North America, while remaining surprisingly practical for the far more common species that make up most hunting seasons. Instead of owning separate rifles for deer, elk, moose, and bear, many experienced hunters have found they can confidently rely on a single rifle chambered in .375 H&H for all of them. It's a level of versatility that few cartridges can honestly claim, and it's a major reason .375 H&H continues to earn the respect of hunters more than a century after its introduction. The watchdog take. Here's what's actually going on with this cartridge, and it's the same pattern that shows up every time something genuinely well-engineered gets compared against 100 years of flashier competitors. The .375 H&H was never the cartridge with the biggest number on the box. It was never the newest, and for most of its history, it wasn't even the most powerful option available to hunters, who wanted maximum stopping power at any cost. What it was, and what it still is the most complete answer to the actual question hunters have been asking for over a century. Not what hits the hardest, but what single rifle can I trust across the widest range of situations, including the situation I hope never happens. That's a fundamentally different question than the one most modern cartridge marketing is built to answer. And it's exactly why a round designed before airplanes were common is still the cartridge professional guides reach for today, rather than something engineered in the last 20 years with better software and better metallurgy behind it. Newer isn't automatically better when the old design was already solving the right problem instead of chasing the biggest number on a spec sheet. If you're a hunter who's spent your whole life assuming versatility means owning 3 or 4 different rifles for 3 or 4 different kinds of game, the TON 375 H&H exists to make a different argument. Sometimes the smartest setup in the safe isn't the newest one, or the one with the flashiest ballistic coefficient chart behind it. Sometimes it's the one that quietly, unglamorously, has been doing the exact job you need done since before your grandfather was hunting, without ever needing to be replaced.